Okay, we have one last caller. We're going to talk to April in Kentucky. How you doing, April?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for waiting and taking my call.
Yeah, thank you for waiting so long. I know you've been on hold a long time.
Yeah, so I have been listening to your show through YouTube for the last year. I grew up Pentecostal, and I have actually purchased the book by Jerry DeWitt, Hope After Faith. Yeah, so my parents are extremely involved in the United Pentecostal Church International.
Okay.
They were youth pastors. My mother was the music director. I was a musician from the time I was 8 years old. So I was indoctrinated from a very early age, right? I knew as a very young girl, even though we were so sheltered from the outside world, we weren't allowed to have television, weren't allowed to watch movies, listen to secular music, go to friends' houses who were not Pentecostal, etc. You know, so we had no idea what the real world was like outside of the Pentecostal faith. But I knew I was different. I knew I didn't have the attraction to boys I should have. And so I struggled with that. I wound up marrying at the age of 20 and knew walking down the aisle that I was making a horrific mistake. But I did it because I was so scared, terrified that someone would find out my little secret, right?
Yeah.
And it finally, I guess the crescendo was the birth of my second child when I realized I had so eloquently boxed myself into this life that I knew was not for me. And battled suicidal depression, actually had a gun to my chin, and the only thing that stopped me was I was scared to death that I wouldn't actually kill myself with the first shot, and I would have to explain to people why I did it.
Yeah.
And that woke me up. So I divorced and moved on. Actually, a year later, wound up in my first lesbian relationship. My parents didn't know. No one knew. You know, I was still so terrified that they would find out. And so, you know, you fast forward 8 years, and I finally gained confidence in who I am. But the struggle was always, how do you equate that God loves you, but he hates you if you're gay? How do you equate that? How do you make that okay?
Yeah.
And so I started studying because I knew my family would try their best to convince me that I was just a sinner and that God could change me. But what they didn't know, that for years I fasted and prayed and begged God to change me, and I received no answer. You know, the heavens were glass. I never felt that spirit, that answer, nothing. You know, and I had heard preachers even talk about that, how the heavens were glass. I couldn't get an answer. Well, that's because there was nothing there.
Yeah.
You know, there was nothing there to answer.
Yeah.
And so I was studying in order to, from a biblical perspective, make it okay that I was gay. And I had it down to a science.
Yeah.
You know, I had it down to the original Aramaic where the word was not translated correctly, you know, where it meant a temple or ritual prostitute, not a homosexual individual, blah, 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 all the way through the New Testament. I could lay it out for them. But, of course, they were scared to debate me because that meant admitting they didn't know the Bible the way they thought they did.
Yeah.
Until the point when my son came home and made the comment, "You're going to hell because it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve." And that hit the boiler point with me.
Yeah.
Because my ex had moved into the Baptist faith and become the youth minister at their church. So he had moved from Pentecostal to Baptist, which meant he was going to hell anyway, right?
Yeah.
Because you can only go to heaven if you're a Pentecostal.
Right. Unless you're Baptist.
He's going to hell anyway.
Yeah.
Don't know that because they weren't raised Pentecostal. And so when he said that, I had to, I'm a quality engineer, so root cause analysis, that's what I do for a living every day. You find the root cause. And so I knew in order to pinpoint that, it had to come from someone who respected at church, and that's the pastor.
Yeah.
Because I knew his dad wouldn't be that vocal and blunt with the kids. You know, because he doesn't want to create a divide. We have a great relationship now. he wouldn't do that and make them not want to be around me. So I gave it a few days, pulled it over, and called the pastor. And we had this debate, and I asked him point blank. I said, I need to know, because my child came home telling me I'm going to hell because I'm gay, and I need to know if you told him that. And, of course, he stumbled and, well, you know, I don't say that from the pulpit. Well, I don't care where you say it. Yeah. I don't care if it's over coffee or if it's at Hardee's or if it's over the pulpit. I don't care. If you say that within earshot of my child, you are influencing him, and you have no proof. And so I took him back through the science, and when I brought up science, he interrupted me and said, well, now, are these Christian studies you're referring to? I said, why is it predicated upon whether a person is a Christian or not in order to find the truth? Mm-hmm. And he couldn't answer me. And I asked him, I said, tell me honestly, how much study have you done on this topic before you get up and preach it across the pulpit? He said, well, honestly, I haven't done any. I said, then you, my friend, are preaching your personal opinion, and that has no place in a pulpit. And he hung up on me. And it makes me so angry that people influence kids to hate their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
you know, I mean, I've already dealt with this with my parents. My mother actually told me over the phone they thought I had throat cancer 4 years ago. The day I was in the hospital for testing, my sister convinced me to call her and tell her what was going on. Her exact words were, well, thank God, this is an answer to prayer. I've been praying that God would do whatever it takes to wake you up, and I guess this is it. She was happy that they thought her child had cancer, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. If your religion denies the existence of your children and you would rather them die than live for their kids and your grandkids, then you do not have any basis to say you love people and that you are any form of what Christianity should be.
Yeah. Well, you know, isn't it interesting that people's God always hates all the same people they do?
Yeah.
Isn't it funny? It's like we weren't allowed to go to basketball games because the preachers didn't like basketball, but it was okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's just preposterous. And so I literally have no family now. I mean, it literally broke at that point. It broke.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, what could you do after that? I mean.
Right. I mean, I have the uncle who would stand over my dying grandfather and look me dead in the eye and say, I think all gay people ought to be took outside and stoned, all while in the midst of a 3-year affair that he was having on his wife.
Yeah.
No.
You know, and it's just amazing to me. And once I started really studying and I really started reading Richard Carrier, James Randi, all those guys, it is amazing when you go back and you look at the history. Theism started from polytheism, Zoroastrianism. All these cults created the Jewish faith, which then created the offset of Christianity, and they all started with polytheism, and yet they claim there's only one God, and they can't prove any of it.
Yeah.
It just amazes me how divisive religion can be when it's supposed to bring people together and promote community, and you know, and it turns families against each other, and just it makes me sad and it makes me angry that somebody's religion would be more important than their child. I just can't fathom that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and I have a niece now who is in the Navy, who has come out.
Good for her.
She is married now, and it is a biracial relationship, which is even worse.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that goes over well with the Southern Baptists.
Yeah. Well, that family is still Pentecostal. So
oh, okay.
Not only do you not marry, you definitely are not gay. So it's like a double whammy. And I'm being blamed for her being gay. And I saw her 3 times a year. Somehow, I telepathically
you know, the gay
transferred it to her. Or
the
something.
gay
I
is
don't
so
know.
powerful. I mean, don't you feel powerful?
I'm like, wow. I asked her, I said, Serena, seriously, like, am I not the shit right now?
Yeah.
Because I gave you my voodoo. I would actually walk up to these people that I used to go to church with, that I grew up with in church, and I would see them at Walmart or where. I would actually walk up to them and give them a big hug, and I wanted to just look at them and say, "Ooh, now you got the lesbian," you know, because that's how they feel.
It makes you want to walk around with a pocket full of glitter all the time, right?
Yeah.
You can just walk in their church and glitter the hell out of these people.
Yeah. I actually had one Pentecostal minister who, it was a woman, and she actually had talked to me, and I had talked to her before I came out, before I divorced, and she and I had a pretty good relationship. And I think it's not so much that, obviously, that she talked to God. It was more that she was just a very intuitive, you know. She was one of those people who could really read your struggles.
Yeah.
And there are just people who are like that. I tend to be like that because I'm a very observant person. And she came to me one service. My mother convinced me to go with her. She thought she was going to convert me, whatever, right? So I go in my pants, which was a no-no, my makeup, which was a horrible no-no because I was a Jezebel, right?
Yep.
Your makeup, jewelry, pants, haircut, all of those things were no-nos. And I'm not kidding you, they gave me a wide berth when I walked into that church. But this lady came down and sat beside me. She asked me, she said, "So how have you been?" And I told her, you know, divorced, and I was in cosmetology school at the time. And she said, "So starting over?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I just have one question. Are you happy?" I said, "You know what? I am. I am very happy." And I was going through a breakup at the time, but I was still happier than I had ever pretending to be something I was not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the closet's a terrible place to be. People who've never been in the closet for any reason, I think it's hard to explain.
It's hard to explain the fear.
The fear and how challenging that is to you as a person to be in the closet about something.
And to be so stifled by such a controlling religion.
Yeah.
I think it would have been different had I been Baptist or, you know, any other Christian religion other than the Pentecostal faith, which is so stifling to anything that is expressive of anything they don't agree with. Yes, just your base humanity. Yeah. And that's one of those things I asked that preacher. I said, at what point in your life do you remember choosing between boys or girls when it comes to attraction?
Yeah.
He said, well, I didn't. I said, then what gives you the audacity to think I did?
Yeah.
He didn't have an answer. He said, well, honestly, you know, I've never been to, they start giving the excuses, right? I've never been to seminary. I've never been. I said, then what gives you the authority to stand in a pulpit and tell people they're going to a hell you've never studied?
Yeah.
Right? But the fear they put in people. Yeah. It's not love they put in people, it's fear. I had nightmares as a child about hell.
Which is why, this is one of the reasons that indoctrination is so effective. Because, you know, they create a situation where, you know, in a lot of communities, the church is almost the entire social group. And then they create this fear that you're not only going to be ostracized from an important social group, but there's an existential threat attached to that. You know, you don't dare even doubt, much less, you know, step outside the norm here.
Right.
So,
and the big threat from my parents is that, you know, when your children leave the faith, it's somehow that you did something wrong as a spiritual leader of the family.
Yeah. Yeah, so they try to put the guilt on you because you not only, you know, you put your own immortal soul at risk, but you're also hurting them personally because the community now looks down on them.
Right.
As if it's about them.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
It's always about them.
Yeah.
It seems like in the church world, it's an inward view.
Mm-hmm.
and in a humanitarian world, and it's an external view.
Yeah.
And with churches, they only think about how they can help their own. But when you don't have that church that you can, by default, say, well, I'm not going to help that homeless person on the street. I'm just going to give it to the church, and God will do with it what He will. No, He won't. It'll go to the pastor's new Mercedes. I'm sorry to tell you.
Well, I didn't know
or
any
his $1,000 suit.
I didn't know any pastors that drove Mercedes, but I mean, you know,
in the Pentecostal faith, I mean, you'll have to, the next time you talk to Jerry DeWitt, you'll have to ask him about the preachers who show up at conferences wearing the $500 shoes and the $1,000 to $3,000 suits, and their wives look like something out of some kind of modeling catalog. It's insane at the hierarchy that involves
I've seen
faith.
these guys. I didn't know any of them growing up. But yeah, I know those guys exist.
Yeah, it's really bad in the Pentecostal faith because that's all they have.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to relate to anyone outside the faith. You're not allowed to associate with people outside the faith. So the only thing you have is this hierarchy within the faith. So it just becomes this competition that no one can ever meet up to.
Yeah.
Well, and as a musician, you know, as a kid, I was a drummer. Well, if that didn't tell them I was not normal girl material.
That is such a lesbian to do.
Right. But my mother hated it until I became very, very popular, and I had pastors calling, asking if I could play for their women's conferences, you know, and there would be 3,000 or 4,000 women there, and I would go play for them. Well, my mother wanted to go then. Yeah. Because it was notoriety.
Of course.
That's my daughter. We were embarrassed before.
Well, April, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're running on a time crunch here, so we're going to need to let you go. But thanks so much for calling and telling us your story.
Yes, appreciate it a lot. And have a happy holiday.
Well, keep up the good work. I appreciate it. It has been a help to me.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
And go Cowboys. You guys have had a stellar season, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I totally don't do football.
Yeah, that's not my thing either. But thank you so much.
So